Good evening to everyone. Thanks for coming out on this cool July evening. John, this is a cool evening for us because we get it much hotter at times. Yeah, that. And I mentioned about the coffee and the water and all of that sort of stuff. I want to recognize three individuals who are here. Without them, we couldn't make this roundtable work. One of them is this lady here. Susan is the head of the museum, has been here longer than I. And she has put her heart and soul into this roundtable and helping this be successful. And I sure want to thank her for that. Chris, yeah, thank you. Hey. And behind over there's it's Kristen Still, and she's in charge of all the electronics. So, John, if anything goes bad, walk over and say, "Hey, Kristen, and we'll blame her." Nicholas has been here a long time, too. And we have a couple other individuals I want to introduce before we get into other stuff. And one of them sitting over here on your right, and when I ask her to stand up, is Dr. Sharon Kowalski. Dr. Kowalski is the head of the history department at East Texas A&M University, is on the board of the Roundtable, and she knows every World War II historian in the state of Texas. So we don't have any trouble identifying those people with Sharon. And also with us tonight is a very special individual who's been supportive of this roundtable from the time we started it. A man who spent his whole career here in this community. A wonderful individual. He's the mayor of the city of Greenville. Would you please stand up, Mayor Jerry Ransom, and take it up. Well, I recognize you. Thank you. Well, let me say one other thing before you start. John, you're a professor, right? And you have classes where they're not required to take them, but they can sign up for your class. And by and large, you'd think if they do that and the class is full, man, they really like you as a professor. I mean, that's a home run. Well, I want to tell you something. You have filled this house tonight. It is full. And all of it, within reason, is due to you being here. And we thank you for that. So I'm saying that before. All right. Well, my name is Rod Rockliston. I had the privilege of serving as chairman of the Roundtable and Audie Murphy Chapter, the only World War II history roundtable in Texas. Special guests with us this evening includes all of them I have introduced to you. When you came in this evening, each of you were given a ticket for a book raffle. As you might imagine, the book is John McManus' widely acclaimed book, The Dead and Those About to Die. John will be happy to autograph it after the lecture. Susie, could you come up? Oh, okay. And I have to read it? Okay. Okay, 834. You pay that to do anything. 2152. Who got it? You got it? She'll bring it with her to you. Yes. And Jan will be happy to autograph it after the lecture to see. You will see it there. We trust each one. On your seat is the 2026 flyer of the Roundtable's fourth lecture seat. You will note that Lecture 2 with Michael Paradis was rescheduled for April 22 next year, 27, in the year 2027. Okay. Due to an unexpected requirement that he be in Washington on April 23rd of this year. Last week, we had to reschedule the upcoming program on August 20th with Seth Paradon and John Parshall to January 28th, 2027. Your flyer tells you about the unusual format for their program, meaning being on stage at the same time, discussing all aspects of World War II, for questions sent to their podcast, and they have a podcast called The Unauthorized History of the Pacific War. So you won't want to miss that coming here and being with us in January. As you can tell, it hasn't been the best month for us as it relates to getting lectures coming to campus or coming to here to the museum. Both Seth Paradon and John Parcel host a weekly podcast called The Unauthorized History of the World War II that I just mentioned. Last week, during episode 609, they've done 609 podcasts in about 5 years. I think that's right, isn't it, John? Yep. They both mentioned Greenville in their podcast and our volunteer staff. And regretted the cancellation and reassured Northeast Texas they would see us in January. Now that says something with historians as talented as they are would take the time from their podcast to say good things about us. So you don't want to miss that podcast in January. Now, and speaking of World War II podcasts, John McManus and Kevin Hemel are online weekly with World War II Live podcasts. And many of you will recall Kevin being with us during Audie days. He was here this past spring to discuss the movie 6888. If you haven't heard that as a World War II related movie, you must see it. It's incredible. Their podcast is exceptional in that they have a few minutes for those calling in with a question about World War II to a quote, stop the chumps. So John is a chump stumper. We only have one chump here tonight, so be ready with your questions. Okay. Speaking on schedule, the Roundtable Board will meet in September to begin the process of selecting the remaining 3 lectures for 2027. 2 of them will be quarterly programs in July and October. The remaining program will be during the annual Audie Days in May. The program at your chair gives you the opportunity to give us your thoughts about local individual stories to invite, as well as World War topics to consider. After the lecture, Susan Lanning of the museum staff will be in the audience and assist Skip Steely in the Q&A part of the program. A microphone would be brought to those who raise their hands by Susan. And please wait until Susan brings the microphone to you before asking the question so that your audio will be caught on tape. And by the way, Dr. McManus's lecture will be up on YouTube within a few days by accessing the Greenville YouTube site. Dr. McManus's latest book, Dead and Those About to Die, is available for purchase afterward. And of course, he'll be happy to autograph his book for you and pose for pictures if you would like. Included in your printed program is an evaluation of tonight's lecture. We want to hear from you what you think about the lecture and what we could do better with the roundtable. And now, would you welcome board member Skip Steely to officially welcome our speaker. A native of Paris, Texas, a graduate of East Texas State University, the author of many books on World War II in East Texas, among which is the biography of Admiral James Richardson, entitled Pearl Harbor Countdown. Richardson preceded Admiral Husband Kimmel as head of the Pacific Fleet in Corps. And Richardson was from Paris, Texas. And that's how Skip got onto it. And he ended up there, the danger. Did he, Skip, or do you remember where he passed away? Was it Paris or no? He's okay. All right, please welcome Skip Steely. And that's your
Admiral Richardson had a really nice house in Chevy Chase or Cafés, but I never could figure where in the world he got the money to buy something like that, build something like that in 1926 on an innocent salary. And years later, I found out that his family had sold land in Paris, Texas, to Paris Junior College. And therefore, Paris Junior College actually purchased his house for him. So that solved that mystery. You know, I usually prepare for our lectures about watching movies about the subject or reading books or whatnot. And this time I decided to go back and look and watch The Big Red One. Pretty bad movie, right?
Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah, it's huge. And The Longest Day had some great actors in it, some good quotes. Private Ryan. And then I ran into The Last Rifleman with Pierce Brosnan. He's in a nursing home. He's a member of the old Ulster Rifles battalion that attacked Normandy. And his wife died, and he noticed they were having the 75th anniversary, I think, of Normandy, so he broke out of the nursing home, slipped into the laundry van with his suitcase, and the laundry van took him to town. He surprised the guy when he opened the door, and there was a man sitting in the laundry van. And then he got on the train, and the story went on from there. But it was really great because he ran into an American when he was at Normandy, and the American said, "You know, we're all living with ghosts." And they were having them flashbacks, constant flashbacks on what they did and the friends they were killed and whatnot. He had actually been the friend of his boyfriend, of his best friend's girl, and married her after the best friend got killed in Normandy. Yeah, it really brought home the really nasty points of such a battle. My friend John Good in Paris landed on the 6th wave. That was a day or two later, I guess, right?
That's a
Yeah, and everybody had already gone by. Most of the mines had been struck and all that stuff. And he said, I found a satchel inside one of the bunkers, and they told us not to pick up anything, so I grabbed a stick and reached around the corner and flipped the satchel open, and a Nazi flag fell out. And John showed that Nazi flag for the rest of his life. You know, that was his prize for World War II. Anyway, enough said. You got a good biography of John there. We're both sports writers at heart. I spent the afternoon watching my granddaughter race in her wheelchair in New York City, and she won. Pretty neat. Anyway, we've talked about Coach Stallings and everything we can talk about sports-wise. Now he's going to tell you about Normandy. Thank you, John.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Skipper. Appreciate that very much. Thank you all for having me here. It's such a pleasure. I'd like to thank all the folks from the Roundtable, from Ron to Frank to Skipper to everybody else. Amazing folks at the museum, too. I love this museum. I could really be absorbed in this. I'd like to thank the mayor for being here tonight, too. And all of you, too, for making time to be here and subject yourself to listening to me. So I'll try to make the best of it for you. But I tend to think it'd be impossible even for me to make this topic boring. Omaha Beach. I mean, to me, it's one of the iconic American battlefields. And it has been for me my whole life. So I wanted to give you a little bit of background on how I came to this particular topic, and maybe a little bit about how I approached it, to give you a sense of where all this is coming from. I'm one of those people who, ever since I was a kid, I was very absorbed in World War II, of course. Read anything I could on it, but in particular Omaha Beach. Was really drawn to Omaha Beach and to what happened there, and studied it as a child, and of course as an American child. It was all very abstract because you can't just go and visit quite easily. And so this was a kind of distant place for me that became much more real the first time I visited, like fresh out of college as a very young person, to go to Omaha Beach, to see it, to go explore the bunkers, to see the terrain myself, was very, very moving and just only excited my interest that much more. Later, I got the chance to go when I was a graduate student. It was called the Normandy Scholars Program. Kind of interesting thing. There were 4 universities that were part of that program. I went to the University of Tennessee for my doctorate, the real UT, sorry. Couldn't resist. University of Texas was one of the other ones, Texas Tech and Texas A&M. And so part of the program was you'd got to go and spend a decent part of a summer in Normandy. and exploring the battlefields, not just the invasion beaches, of course, but pretty much every element of this. And it was team taught by a range of professors, a linguist, a philosopher, and then my major professor, who was a military historian, and kind of that's where I was coming at it from as well. And so this then, is just that much more, teaching me about Omaha Beach and really kind of motivating me to explore it more. So later on, as a faculty member, I got to go as a battlefield historian and to kind of go there with folks and maybe show them around and tell them a little bit about what happened there. And then, of course, eventually as an author. And the incredible thing that occurred to me after decades now is that even though Omaha Beach is so iconic, and of course, many of us have studied it, backwards and forwards, I felt there was still more to know. And specifically, I felt the story of the 1st Infantry Division could probably add something to our knowledge of Omaha Beach because, interestingly enough, the original historians, the combat historians who were documenting what had happened in the invasion, kind of interviewing the survivors the best they could, very, very haphazard process that takes place in the weeks after D-Day, but nonetheless established some of our first historical records of what had gone on there. And they had really kind of skewed on the side of the 29th Infantry Division and the Rangers. Of course, no problem with that, but there was like hundreds of pages of material on that and 83 pages on the Big Red Line. And so I think subsequent history has kind of fixed its attention there, straight down to Private Bryan, which of course takes place on the western part of Omaha Beach. And again, nothing wrong with that, but the point is, I felt maybe there was a little bit more to know by exploring the experience of the 1st Infantry Division or Big Red Line. So happily enough, from an historian standpoint, partly also what had drawn me to this too is all the people I'd known over the years from that unit or attached to that unit, with whom I had spoken or knew of or had read their letters or had read Veterans Association newsletters in which they shared their experiences, whatever the case may be. Over time, I had built up a little bit of knowledge about this, and of course, the actual documentary record, when you look at the unit records and other pertinent material, is really quite voluminous. After action reports, unit journals, some of the combat interviews, photographic evidence, on and on it goes. Contemporary stuff, and then of course much latter year stuff that ranged all the way to my ordinary conversations with people. So I thought, all right, let's get inside this one unit and look at what happens to them at Omaha Beach. And that'll maybe bring this to life for us a little bit more. So the first thing to understand about the 1st Infantry Division in this whole story is the division, the unit, whatever you want to call it, it had a unique personality. And then that's the first thing to grasp. The Big Red One was not a rookie unit. It had fought in the Mediterranean. It had 2 invasions in the Mediterranean, North Africa, and Sicily. It had done a lot of hard fighting in the Mediterranean theater. And of course, if we go back any further, it of course had fought in World War I. That's where it got its nickname. It was known as the 1st Division in that war. It designed the 1st Divisional patch, which of course still exists to this day. A lot of the iconic fighting in World War I. So it's a regular Army unit in its background, but that doesn't mean everybody who comes ashore at Omaha Beach is a professional soldier, regular Army person. It's a mix of people. So in the Mediterranean, the unit earns a reputation as a go-to outfit that will get you results, and for good reason. They fought hard, they were tough, resourceful, wicked combat soldiers. They were killers in that sense, as you had to be as an infantryman in real combat quite often. So they had a good reputation in that sense, but not so good while off the line. While off the line, these guys tended to get into a lot of trouble, because they resented the rear echelon. They liked to beat up rear echelon soldiers or take over bars from them, or they weren't always the most disciplined outfit. And so I think one of their key phrases they told each other during World War II, I think gives us a little insight into what they were like. They used to like to say, the United States Army consists of the Big Red One and 10 million replacements. So right there, it tells you a little bit of their worldview, how they view the rest of the Army. And a lot of times there's this kind of vibe from these guys that they're only going to kind of follow their own officers. If you're an officer from another unit trying to order one of these guys around, maybe not going to go over that well. This is something of the vibe. And that certainly rubs a lot of people the wrong way. And so if you put some eyeballs on the leadership And that's kind of the next place I want to go with you on this. This is Major General Terry Allen, who was the division commander in the Mediterranean. Terry de la Mesa Allen, very colorful cavalryman, the kind of guy who was always up front, typically, very down-to-earth general. He's the kind of general that if you encountered him, and so many did among the soldiers of the Big Red One, the encounter was probably positive. You can't say that about enlisted encounters with senior officers all the time, but in the case of Allen, they loved it. And not because he indulged them or pampered them or something, because he inspired them. And because he obviously cared for them. He really didn't care about self-promoting to get the next promotion to 3-star or something like that. What he cared about was leading these guys in action. He didn't care about the spit and polish, like the hardcore discipline of Army life and making sure your boots were shined properly or proper salutes to officers from other units or something like that. He cared how you fought. And he led from the front. And so he's leading you in the Mediterranean and in Sicily. And, of course, he has, built up tremendous loyalty among the soldiers of the Big Red One. So you already know a little bit about what they're like. So you can imagine, their loyalty to him versus, say, others. And also, his assistant division commander is almost exactly the same as he is in terms of his leadership approach. You may have heard of him, Theodore Roosevelt Jr., who was the son of the president, of course. And Theodore Roosevelt Jr. had been badly wounded in World War I while serving with the Big Red One as a commander. He had helped found the American Legion. He had been High Commissioner in the Philippines in the 1930s. And then he comes back to active duty, and he's basically Allen's number 2. And so that's the culture they've created. But as I said, it doesn't always meld with the rest of the Army that well. And it kind of rubs some of the higher-ups the wrong way. Like Omar Bradley was a Corps commander at that point, and is a little bit more of the traditional kind of guy as to how how leadership should be done. George Patton, we all know that he is a little bit of a stickler for discipline at times, to the point where you have to wear a necktie. If he catches you, you're going to get fined if you don't wear a necktie, that kind of thing. Okay, so they have a kind of love-hate relationship with Patton and Roosevelt. And also there's a sense, too, among even the higher-ups in Washington, D.C., like in the Pentagon, George Marshall and others, that you need officers of Allen's caliber to train up the next generation of senior officers once you start to build a mass army to invade Europe. Okay, so all of this combines to create a situation in which Allen is not necessarily fired, but he is rotated out of command, but the soldiers perceive it as a relief, as a firing, because they don't know what's going on. They know Allen's there one day during the Battle of Sicily, and the next day, their beloved commander is gone. How do you think they're going to react to that? Really ticked off. And Roosevelt, too. Roosevelt is also, ushered out, and you may know, of course, he ends up in a supernumerary type of role with the 4th Infantry Division, goes ashore at Utah Beach, and eventually earns the Medal of Honor for his exploits on D-Day. I had the opportunity to tour the Medal of Honor Museum in Dallas today. Highly recommend that to all of you. Incredible place. So anyway, you've got a completely new leadership group, and the soldiers are going to resent it. So in comes the next guy, and a lot is riding on this appointment. This is Major General Clarence Ralph Huebner. Ralph Huebner and Terry Allen are classic examples of how great leadership can come from completely different approaches. Terry Allen, informal, common, folksy, hanging out with you, not really worried about whether your blouse is out of sorts or something like that, or you got dirt on your uni, whatever it would be. He cares about just being in combat. Huebner is much more of a stickler for the spit and polish discipline. To their credit, they never undercut each other. Ever. They work very well together in this transition. But here you are as a Big Red One soldier. Imagine one of these very proud guys who's lived through the Battle of Sicily now, and all of a sudden, here comes this guy into the unit, injected into your world, who cares about all that Army discipline that you felt you left back at home in basic training. Now you're a combat soldier, you don't have to worry about all that crap. That's sort of the privilege of being an infantry soldier. Most infantry soldiers tend to hate the rest of the world. That's your privilege. That you don't have to worry about that spit and polish. That's the way these guys are. So here comes Huebner saying, no, we need a different approach. And so he basically says, all right, everyone needs to salute their officers. And so the reaction is like, this guy doesn't know combat, he's a fool, he's an idiot, he's a stateside Johnny, he's a desk guy. They're like, salute an officer in combat or get him killed. So why has Unit done this? He wants to make sure orders are followed. Because he says, if you give an order and it's never followed, you might as well not give the order. So you have to follow up and make sure that it's followed. He doesn't really care about the saluting per se, he cares about the follow through. One other thing that he does that's quite tangible in its results is he looks at the personnel files and he realizes, because of course combat is so chaotic in the battles the Big Red only have been part of in the Mediterranean, he realizes that a substantial number of the infantrymen, particularly the riflemen, have never actually qualified on their rifles. That would seem to be important, that you know how to use your rifle, rifle marksmanship. So he's not undercutting Alan and saying, oh, Alan, you really screwed up or anything. He's just saying, let's address this. Let's make sure people qualify on their rifles and on all the weapons, as many as they can, because you're going to have to use a lot of them in combat and you need to know how to use them. He also mandates that they know the job of people 1, 2, 3 rungs above them in the hierarchy. Why? Because there's going to be casualties, of course, and you've got to assume the mantle of leadership. So he's doing all this, and towards the end of the Battle of Sicily, and again, the soldiers have no idea who he is or where he comes from. Well, we do, because we're historians, we're these little smart alecks who know everything, right? So Huebner, fascinating story. He was born in Kansas in the late 19th century, 1888. On a Kansas wheat farm. He loved sports. He played any sport that he possibly could. He was educated in one-room school, that kind of thing. And he's like the best student. Gets a high school diploma, which was not fully common for everybody back then. And so he's basically become a teacher and a coach as a young man. But this was starting to bore him. So in, I think it's 1916, joins the Army, so it's right before the U.S. enters World War I. He joins as a private. He works his way through the NCO ranks. He gets a commission out of the ranks. So he doesn't go to West Point, anything like that. Gets commissioned out the ranks. He gets deployed to France and serves in combat in World War I as a battalion commander. So he gets a pretty high rank of he's a lieutenant colonel at the end of the war. He's badly wounded. He gets the Distinguished Service Cross, which you may know is the second highest award for bravery. And guess which division he served in? The Big Red one. Does he come to the division trumpeting that background and saying, I'm just an incredible combat soldier, you should worship me? No, they have no idea who he is or what he's done. They just think he's some martinet making their lives miserable. And they hate him for it. As he says famously, quite colorably, to his chief of staff, Stan Hope Mason, who later becomes a general himself. He says, Stan, you can start by being an SOB and then become a good guy, but you can never start by being a good guy and become an SOB. And so true in a military setting, and maybe other settings too, I dare say. But he understands maybe that's what the unit needs here, that they have to kind of focus their aid on him. And he's willing to take that for a while. The other thing he's up against, of course, is the resentment of the unit that they're not sent home. So they're put aboard ships at the end of the Battle of Sicily, and they start to go west in the Mediterranean. So all these rumors, soldiers being soldiers, there's all the rumors, and the rumors say, we're going home to train up new guys, our war is over. And they allow themselves to think that, but it's not true. There's no way on earth the commanders are going to let a unit of this quality go home like that. So you go past Gibraltar, and then you take that right turn and you're going north. We all know what that means. You don't have to be Eisenhower to figure this out. You're going to England, and that means you're training up either for the invasion or the big campaign that's going to happen in France. And what that means is very serious combat again. So there's a lot of resentment of these guys once they get to England and are training up in those months leading to D-Day, that they have to be called upon for this again. But the higher American commanders don't have a lot of choices. You have at their disposal at that point, if you are Eisenhower and Bradley, you basically got 2 combat experienced infantry divisions to make that amphibious assault. The 1st and the 9th. And the 9th has arrived after the 1st and isn't quite ready in their estimation. So Bradley is like, sorry, I know they've been there and done that, but we need them again, and we need them for the toughest mission, which, of course, is Omaha Beach. Now, they're going to be alongside the 29th, which is brand new to combat, so it's fascinating dynamic there because they're brand new. They're a National Guard unit, and 1st Division has that kind of regular background, and obviously some of them have seen a lot of combat. But both of them succeed in their own way, so it shows you the success of the training, I think. And I think it's also important to remember that by D-Day, among those who actually carry out the Omaha Beach assault for the Big Red One, about half are new guys and about half are veterans. That's the mix of replacements. So the replacements have been kind of steeped in the culture by then, inculcated in this whole thing, and I think that matters. There's a kind of muscle memory among the division and soldiers as to how to deal with difficult combat. So during those months, Clarence Huebner will train them hard. He rides them really, really hard. But the interesting thing is he's out there doing the same training they are. And this is a guy in his 50s, well into his 50s. He's a very old man to these young soldiers, right? And, you know, they kind of notice that over time. They're like, oh, he's like a stickler for rifle marksmanship, and he's really good with a rifle. He knows every machine gun. He can talk about every weapon we use. He knows how the ranks work. And he's even gone through this anti-tank training, which is pretty terrifying, honestly, where basically you get in a hole and you stay there while a tank runs over the hole. And you're supposed to stay there. It gives you the discipline, right? So there's this soldier who watches Huebner do this one day. He sidles up to an officer and he said begrudgingly, you know, the old man really knows his stuff. That was high praise, you know. So they were starting to build some level of respect for him as he's training them up. But they're also doing this kind of trade-up that the pace is just breakneck because for obvious reasons, of course. They're doing a lot of landing rehearsals, so much so that a lot of soldiers would have sworn that they joined the Navy rather than the Army. They're aboard ships so much. They're like, you know, when are we going to get on land? And a lot of these times, too, you know, what's interesting is that in many cases, they don't know it's not the real invasion. So you amp up with your adrenaline, you're like, oh, here we go, and then, oh, it's another exercise, you know. So there's this constant kind of ebb and flow to the training. But I venture to say that by D-Day, he really has them trained up to a pretty fever pitch. It's an excellent unit. And by the way, how large is the division? Just in case you don't know, in that era, about 16,000 soldiers, roughly. There's going to be a bunch of people attached to the division, too. But that's the organic size of it, typically, okay? So this is what you're up against. You're looking here at the 1st Division side of Omaha Beach, and you see 3 sectors. So you use our need a little laser pointer here. Box red, that's extreme east of Omaha Beach, remember. Box green, right there, and easy red, which is the largest single sector on Omaha Beach. So you can see the Germans defend it with what are called WNs, Widerstandsnetz, and my German pronunciation bad, so I apologize if you're a German linguist. But the Widerstandsnetz are basically these kind of fortified areas designed to prevent you from getting off the beach. There are no paved roads on the Big Red One side of Omaha Beach, none. So you are dependent for getting off that beach on the natural valleys or draws, as they're generally called, which you can see portrayed on our map here. So naturally, the Germans are going to defend those very areas where you would hope to get off the beach. And that's where you're very, very vulnerable. So these Widerstandsnetz are fortified strong points of like the classic sort of concrete pillbox bunkers and like circular concrete fighting positions that are known as Tobruks because they had been used in North Africa. So you've got like a machine gun position in there, or a mortar, and sometimes they're connected by tunnels to the bunkers. There's individual gun pits, you know, all of this kind of stuff. And of course, a lot of mines, a lot of barbed wire, you know, fixed machine gun positions, all of this kind of stuff. And then you'll notice here the obstacle belt, which is getting heavier every day in the spring of 1944, as the Germans are frantically trying to fortify the coast. By D-Day, Omaha Beach is still a work in progress from a German point of view. They have not completed their fortification. So imagine if they had more time, how much more formidable this would have been. So, how many Germans are you going to face there? Okay, so by my estimate, you're looking at maybe about 500. So that's another strength battalion. So you're not talking like tens of thousands or anything, fortunately. But a lot of the defending for them is done by these weapons and by nature, which of course, at Omaha Beach, as we'll see when I show you an image in a minute, it's high ground looking over that beach. And cliff sides on either side. It's about 4.5 miles long. It's crescent shape, which means you've got bracketing fire on either side. Anybody down on that beach, especially at low tide, could be really, really vulnerable. And that's what the Germans are counting on. So it's kind of a force multiplier. And in between the WNs, they sow lots of mines to restrict mobility. So this is the low ground here, gives way to sloping higher ground, a ridge line that broods over the whole thing, a lot of crags and little valleys and little foxholes and machine gun positions, you name it, that go all the way up there. Here's the look of it decades later, and you can see the crescent shape. Now you're looking from the perspective of WN60. Okay, so I'll go back to show you where that is. Right there. That's the eastern extreme of Omaha Beach in terms of German defensive positions. Okay, so from up here, this is about right here where the image is taken. And you can see you're looking at the full expanse of Omaha Beach, all along that crescent, through the 29th Division and Ranger sector there, all the way to Pointe de la Percée. That's not Pointe du Hoc. It's often mistaken for that. Pointe du Hoc is a little farther over, from that. Okay, so this is, there's a caveat to this whole thing. There's a lot more foliage here than you would have had in 1944. The Germans cleared most of the brush out. There's cleared fields of fire. They cleared out a lot of the buildings just to make it a kill zone down there. So this is a little bit different, and also the Germans are really inconsiderate. There was no parking lot in 1944, so there were decades later, and there still is remains. But you can see you're looking at approaching high tide. So we're going to come in at low tide. Why? Because it's easier to find and identify the obstacles. Now, by D-Day, Allied invasion planners are so concerned with the proliferation and growth of the obstacles and mines and other fortifications at Omaha Beach that they're going to have to take special steps to deal with that. Meaning, about 1 out of every 4 American soldiers who will assault this beach, not just in the 1st Division sector, but others, is an engineer. Okay, so you have in particular, to go along with the Big Red One, we're called Gap Assault Teams. Now, these are joint Army-Navy engineers who have been trained up for this mission very hurriedly in the weeks leading up to D-Day. The basic delineation of tasks is that the Army is going to take care of everything you can see that's not underwater, the Navy, everything that's underwater. They're bringing in a lot of explosives. It's a very dangerous job. Okay, so that's what you're facing. I'll also point out, too, if we go back very quickly, you're looking at the famous fortifications and that you associate with Saving Private Ryan or whatever. But I will point out, and I will argue, I suppose, tonight, that really the biggest peril to your life is not necessarily those machine guns or those famous bunkers. It's weapons that are not portrayed on our map. Several miles inland are 24 separate 105mm artillery pieces that inflict actually the bulk of the damage on the Americans in these sectors on D-Day. And the other thing is that you've got a forward observer right here at the foot of WN62, a guy named Lieutenant Bernard Frerking, who is in touch with those batteries for much of the day, meaning he can call down fire. And there's a famous line in Saving Private Ryan that Tom Hanks' character says when he's trying to get people moving. He says, "Every inch of this beach has been pre-sighted. You stay here, you're dead man." So true. Every inch of this beach is pre-sighted with those guns and others. And so it's a kill zone, and that's the point. They're trying to bottle you up down there to stymie you from moving into the draws and kill you on the beach, especially at low tide where you're going to have to move across a lot of open ground. So that's kind of what you're up against. So this is designed now for the invasion planners as a combined arms assault from a military perspective. You're going to have all these different groups of combat soldiers land almost at once at H hour from about 6:30 a.m. forward at low tide, all with their specific job. So you're going to have anti-aircraft gunners land, believe it or not, and their job is to put fire on those pillboxes at the WNs and keep the Germans' heads down. You're going to have the Gap Assault Teams who are going to go in and hopefully blow gaps through the obstacle belt that everybody else, vehicles and people, can move through in the course of the morning and the rest of the day. You're going to have tanks. One of the great mythology that is grown about Omaha Beach is that you don't have many tanks on the beach. Actually, untrue. There's a lot of armor that comes ashore in Omaha Beach, just not as much as they claim. That's the rub. And so the armor is supposed to land and start knocking out those strong points. And then, of course, from my biased thinking, always the stars of the show, the infantry, are going to come ashore to ultimately overwhelm this thing, take the ground, and move inland along with everybody else. Everybody has an important role. So that's how it's designed. Okay, here's what actually happens. The pre-invasion bombardment lasts about 45 minutes. And unfortunately, it's next to useless. Why? Well, they want to preserve the element of surprise. Of course, they could have been bombarding for weeks, but they don't want the Germans to be tipped off as to where and when the invasion is going to happen. So they want a quick hit, whatever targets they can identify, and they're going to do that. And the Navy does the best job they can in that moment, but there's only so effective they can be. I calculated in the Vigoride 1 sector, they slightly wounded 2 German soldiers, and they put a flamethrower device out of action. So not what we would hope for. It wasn't pleasant for the Germans, but it didn't do much. Then, of course, the Army Air Force is supposed to come in and bomb Omaha Beach, the 4-engine bombers, and of course, famously, they do next to nothing because they're going to bomb mostly inland. Remember, of course, some of you may have seen the recent movie Pressure about the storms that come in to postpone D-Day. It's a really cloudy day, and you're asking people who are lucky to get their bombs within a mile or so of their target. You're asking them to bomb within a tight window ahead of a friendly fleet and your own guys landing in basically 1,000-yard crust of some kind. I mean, that's just too big an ask. They do the best they can. They're not equipped for it, and they're not going to take any chance dropping on their own people. So that's useless. So this is the classic cynical infantry thing. You've got all this briefing leading up to D-Day. Don't worry, we're going to wreck them with all this firepower. There ain't going to be anything left by the time you get ashore. And then what happens when you get ashore? Everything is pretty much intact. You're like, yeah, same old story. It comes down to us. So going in at H-hour, a lot of the landing craft are off target because the tides are pulling east, because the pre-invasion bombardment creates a lot of smoke and dust. There's a lot of confusion, a lot of mist. And so a lot of them land either late or in the worst or wrong places. So instead of landing all together as one combined arms team, which was the plan, we are landing piecemeal, right in front of the worst of the German defenses in many cases. So for instance, a couple of companies from 16th Infantry Regiment are going to land right here at the mouth of WN62, right there in the kill zone, and get absolutely decimated by machine gun fire, by 50 millimeter gunfire, artillery fire, mortars, you name it. Horrifying. So the Germans can focus on one target after another rather than be overwhelmed by all this combined arms firepower that the plan called for. So the plan is going awry in part because of that. So the German resistance is pretty stiff. And the other element to this too, as not just these units, but others are starting to land, is of course, remember, many of them have been in their land craft for about an hour, hour and a half, circling around out there. The waters are really choppy. This, again, rough seas. And, that means seasickness. And so a lot of these guys are sick as can be. They've already vomited. They don't feel well. They're nervous. They're scared. They're wearing these special uniforms that are supposed to protect them, theoretically at least, against the possibility the Germans are going to use poison gas, which you had the plan for that possibility. So you had these kind of specially impregnated uniforms that were supposed to ward that off. And they were uncomfortable. They were itchy. They didn't breathe. When they got wet, they seemed to get wetter and heavier. And on top of it all, they stank. They stank like sour milk. So you can imagine that smell. That's what you've got all over you. In addition, if you vomited, it's just horrifying, So the soldiers call them skunk suits. One little coda to that point. And several years ago, I was discussing this at Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri, which you may know is home to the Chemical Warfare Branch of the United States Army. So after the presentation, I talked to this highly experienced NCO, a Master Sergeant, I think, who certainly knew a lot about chemical weapons, backwards and forwards. And he said, I actually found out what specific chemical weapons the Germans had in that area in Normandy at that time, what they could have used. And you know what the upshot of it was? And I was like, I was cringing, knowing this is going to be another sort of low to the psyche here. He said, even if the Germans had used those skunk suits wouldn't have helped much at all. So you went through all that discomfort, and then they wouldn't have really protected you. But fortunately, either side uses poison gas. So all it means for you is discomfort. In addition, you're carrying between 70 and 120 pounds. That's a great American military tradition, particularly in the modern era, to weigh down your soldiers with as much stuff as possible, because supply matters, right? So the planners are thinking like logisticians. We need this, 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 and this. And of course, soldiers are thinking that way too. And so they're carrying all this stuff. They're seasick. They're already tired. The adrenaline has already gone through. One little example I'll give you, a PFC named John McPhee. Classic example of youth. He's 18 years old. He's in great prime physical condition. He's this young dude. and ready to fight, except by the time he lands that day, he's so seasick, he's so staggered, he's so scared, he's so laying down with so much stuff that, as he put it, I didn't care if Adolf Hitler himself was waiting for me. You know, I mean, he's just ready to go somewhere and sleep. So a lot of these guys, when they get ashore, they're endangered by the fact that when they ought to be moving like rabbits, they're moving like tortoises because they're staggering under that weight, and so they become better targets. In addition, there's not much mobility because it's a constricted beach. The Gap Saltines have been decimated near the obstacle belt, so they haven't been able to blow pathways, in part because infantry are taking cover behind the obstacles. That's the natural thing you're going to do, you know, take any cover you can. And so the engineers can't blow the obstacles while their own guys are hiding behind them. Tanks have difficult mobility issues because of all this. There's all these bodies lying around. You don't know who's alive or dead. The visibility is bad. You're worried about getting nailed by anti-tank guns. It's really a nightmare for tankers trying to operate in this environment in the course of the day. And on top of it, you've had a tragedy that has taken place for some of the tankers coming in. Some of the tanks coming ashore at Omaha Beach that day were what are called duplex drive tanks. These are like amphibious tanks, specially fitted with like canvas, it's often called skirts, but like this outcropping that you'd have. It would give you flotation, and then you'd have like rotors, and you would go ashore that way. And so you have tanks from the 741st Tank Battalion that fit that category, and one of their key commanders decides, in spite of the choppy seas, I guess we need to go ashore this way rather than try and get in on the landing craft and just land right at the waterline. So 32 out of 32 of those tanks, only 27 do not make it in. Only 5 do. And in fact, in the case of I think 3 of them, they were brought in because the landing craft door would not open, so they had to go in. They just plow their way through the ramp once they get close enough to shore. The other 2 did swim to shore, and they did tremendous damage, by the way, to WN-62 and to WN-61, which you're looking at there. That contained the only 88 millimeter gun on the Big Red one side of Omaha Beach, and it's neutralized in about 30 minutes or so. Today, by the way, the bunker that once housed that is someone's actual private home. So time moves on. Isn't that amazing? Sadly, there's a loss of about 1 crewman per tank on average among those that sank. So that's what diminished the amount of armor that you would have had, but nonetheless, the armor that does get ashore plays a key role in this whole thing. So you now are trying to negotiate, whether you're a tanker, whether you're an infantryman, an engineer, an anti-aircraft guy, a medic, whoever. You're trying to get across that 500 yards of pretty much open, low tide ground. It's horrifying. And so this is the worst time to land on Omaha Beach in the worst place. There's some points, later in the day, it's not as deadly as we often think of. This is the worst moment. And it takes a toll on some of the small unit leaders. Huber has trained them up, but he's not here. He can't be. He's aboard ship. This is a junior leader's fight. It has to be that way. And so it takes a toll on these guys. Let me give you one example. Lieutenant Aaron Denstedt. So he was in F Company 16th Infantry. That's one of the companies I mentioned landed right there at the foot of WN-62, right in the kill zone. So they're under the lee of this machine gun nest that's just raking people over, in addition to mortars and all other terrible stuff. Denstedt had attended UCLA. He was brand new to the unit during the months leading up to D-Day. He was, as a new lieutenant, that doesn't typically are not going to be that popular, and he's got experienced NCOs under him. But Denstedt was very self-effacing, very, very low-key, very humble, and he basically told his experienced sergeants, you know what to do. You just come to me when you need something. So it's quite an interesting dynamic there. Ultimately, he's responsible in charge. So he does have to maybe set his foot down, but he wasn't really that type of officer. So they started calling him Lieutenant Denny. They loved him. And so when his landing craft comes ashore, he and his sergeant decide to go in different directions. And another note I wanted to mention, when you see the soldiers aboard landing craft heading into the shore at Normandy or any other beach in any other invasion, it's not random where you are aboard that landing craft and where you're set up. It is all planned out. So typically, you'll see like a Lieutenant Denstedt at the front near the ramp with the vertical slash on the back of his helmet, means he's an officer. He will lead. He's in charge. He is supposed to lead off there. The guy in the back has the horizontal slash, that the ranking NCO. He is literally the pushman. The NCO has to be the muscle, basically almost kind of intimidating everybody aboard that landing craft. Don't even think about hunkering down here. You'll answer to me. Get off there and do what you're supposed to do. And then you got like riflemen, mortars, bazooka people, flamethrower people, all in these various spots where they're supposed to be to go off and do their own thing. So Denstead and his sergeant basically plan on this, I'll go right, you go left kind of thing. Denstead gets off his landing craft and he almost immediately hit in the head with a fatal wound with a bullet. And he's just dead like that. In minutes, this remarkable young man is destroyed. So typical of modern war. One of the things I found is a letter from his pretty heartbroken mother, as you might imagine, writing to Army historians, urging them to tell her son's story and the story of his unit, the Big Red One. She said, "I am just the proud mother of an only son, and if the story isn't included, I'll try to understand." You read that as a letter, you're a historian, you're like, that's a story that needs to be included. You know, very, very important. So the survivors are pinned down along what's called the shingle bank. So this is like just inland from the obstacle belt, there's stones that are sloped up like an embankment. So I'll show you the remnants of it. Okay, so this is Easy Red, that large expanse of Omaha Beach. And you're looking like straight ahead. WN62 is sort of over here. Behind those trees, by the way, you may know is the modern Normandy American Cemetery today that overlooks Easy Red Beach. So you've got here the shingle bank, the remnants of it, but in 1944 was much more pronounced, much more sloped by design. And so it'll be difficult for people to move over it, or vehicles and all that. But it offered you at least the illusion of some level of safety. It's actually really dangerous. Why? Because they could drop in mortar shells, artillery shells. Those stones are generally, you know, about as big as my fist here, many of them. So you can imagine the fragmentation effect of a lot of those rocks, and in addition to the shells. So there's a lot of people who are kind of catching their breath there, and trying to just survive, and totally shocked too, as you might be. Medics are moving back and forth along that shingle bank there, trying to save as many lives as they can. Omaha Beach is one of the few battlefields I've ever known of that medical personnel are dragging wounded people towards the enemy rather than away. You know, because in many cases you can't evacuate them. It's total chaos when more landing craft are coming in. A lot of the landing craft are earmarked to land more troops, more supplies, more vehicles. They don't have room for the wounded. I think it's one of the planning oversights in D-Day, just my opinion. And the Army tended to do an amazing job with this medical support. They didn't quite prioritize it enough, so it was very difficult to evacuate people that day. So a lot of these medics are moving along the shingle bank here, and then you're looking east now at WN60 right up there. And you can see the shingle bank, okay? And then you can see Easy Red, you would move down towards Fox Green and then Fox Red over by those cliffs. So medics moving back and forth, dragging people. Imagine how heavy they would be with how wet they are, all their equipment, all their stuff, trying to figure out who's savable and who isn't. You're making life and death decisions. There's a 19-year-old medic by the name of Charles Shea in the 16th Infantry who's doing just that. Absolutely just incredible. All up and down the entire Easy Red area, trying to figure out who can live and who can die. Charles unfortunately just died last year. They had, I think, 101 or 102, something like that. One of the most remarkable people ever. So he's just an example of many, many young medics who are encountering that situation. So, all right, so where does this lead in terms of like how we get off the beach and what happens with the bow? Okay. Now, to tell you that story, I want to just focus on a few individuals with the understanding that for each person I'm telling you about tonight, there's probably many others, okay? It could be a dozen others, or, you know, I could even discuss several others I know of, but I'm just choosing these guys as arguably first among equals. But also remember, there's probably many stories we never will know that died with the participants, either because they were killed then, later in the war, or just never told their story or whatever. So that's the reality. History goes where the sources are. So you're looking here at Lieutenant John Spaulding. Lieutenant John Spaulding heads up what's called a boat section. It's basically a platoon of about 32 guys from E Company 16th Infantry, slated to land at Easy Red, right in the heart of Easy Red. Now remember, most of the company had landed near WN62 and then decimated. not Spaulding's unit. He lands in the right place. Okay, Spaulding, interesting guy. He came from Owensboro, Kentucky. He was a sports writer in civilian life. He loved baseball. He loved to talk baseball. He had a young wife back home and I think an infant child. But he was no kid. He was, I think, 29, 30 years old on D-Day and brand new to combat. He had become an officer going through OCS. So he's new to combat and he's taking over a unit that is, in effect, led by one of the most courageous and savviest NCOs in the entire Big Red One. This is Tech Sergeant Phil Stresik from New Jersey. He came from a big Polish-American family of, I think there were 10 kids. And Stresik, had to leave school after the 8th grade to get a job to help the family get through the Depression. And in the Army, he found some level of stability and opportunity, and is really a professional soldier. So he had fought in North Africa and Sicily. He'd been highly decorated, and I would venture to say if you took a poll in the Big Red One in the months leading up to D-Day and said, who's the bravest guy in the division, he'd get a lot of votes. So obviously he knows his way around combat. So yeah, think of the dynamic there. Phil Stresik, you know your way inside and out combat, but you're not the boss. Lieutenant Spaulding is. They got to find a way to figure through that. There's tension, of course, leading to D-Day as to how that'll sort out. And by the way, one of the things I found out, there was even a little tension among the families later on, and I think from misapprehensions, particularly on the Stresik side, that Spaulding was like a glory hound promoting himself over Stresik and others. That really wasn't true. Spaulding gave an interview to a journalist in 1945 talking about his D-Day experience. And the quote that stood out to me, he said, "I didn't do anything, my men did everything." That doesn't sound like a glory hunter to me. I don't know how you feel about it, but I just think it was unfair. But somehow, from that tension comes a very winning leadership team. This boat section lands in the right place, as I mentioned. It's not an easy landing because they're in some parts of deep water with sandbars and whatever else. And they're under some fire, but they're getting, quote, lightly wounded. They're getting lightly wounded. In other words, the kind of thing that would send you and I in normal civilian life to the emergency room, to them it's like, oh, well, no big deal. Fragment wound, scratch, I just kind of move on, So these are very tough individuals, obviously. So Stresik has this know-how about where and how to find mines. And you see how useful that would be? So he is basically, we go back to the heart of this. He figures out a good way to get off the beach and start to move around and outflank some of these German defenses. And he leads the way, and they basically eliminate several machine gun nests, and I'm using a euphemism, basically means kill the enemy who are there. And I say enemy in this sense. They're novel German. There were a significant number of Eastern Europeans who were in the German armed forces in Normandy, including even in the 352nd Division, and some Poles. So imagine yourself as a guy from Poland who's been given the choice, we can work as slave labor to death, or you can serve in the German armed forces. What would you do? And you end up in Normandy pointing weapons at the Americans. Do you shoot? Do you not shoot? You've got German NCOs overseeing you. What happens if you don't shoot? So you're in a tough position. If you're still Phil Stresik, all history's perspective, right? If you're Phil Stresik, you're not so forgiving as I am sitting up here fat and happy tonight. He knows somebody's trying to kill him. And he finds out it's a Polish guy, and he's very angry. So he takes this guy prisoner, and he's screaming at him and cursing at him in Polish, because he can speak Polish. And he kicks him in the seat of the pants, and they're worried he may execute him. Fortunately, he doesn't. But, they basically evacuate the guy down to the beach, like, get this guy away from Stresik, So that's the rage of combat, too. So in the course of the day, the Spaulding Stresik group suffered 2 killed and 8 wounded. There were 7 men in that section who received the Distinguished Service Cross, including Spaulding and Stresik. I think personally Stresik should have gotten the Medal of Honor, just my opinion. But so these are 2 of the key people who helped make that happen in the course of the day. They are operating kind of in this direction toward WN64, another formidable defense. Okay, so imagine them as like knives in the German Bibles, probing around, And so they're doing damage to the Germans there who might be doing otherwise damage to the following waves that are coming in the course of the day. So if you're at like 1st Battalion, 16th Infantry, or later on the 18th Infantry, the other follow-on units are coming in, it's a little bit easier because of what Spaulding and Streisig are doing up there in the bluffs at WN64 and other spots. And they end the day basically enmeshed in the hedgerows, just inland from Omaha Beach. Now, there's another group, and you can see the name of the commander, right here, Dawson. Notice how they go in the other direction. That's G Company 16th Infantry. So they land about 20 minutes behind Spaulding and Streisig. Okay, so in the same regiment, same battalion, but they're like the reserve company. So they come in 20 minutes later. They're led by this guy, Captain Joseph Dawson, from some state called Texas. Maybe this will interest you. He comes from Waco, Texas. He went to Baylor. He was the son of a very prominent minister, kind of a famous minister. And he had attended, as I said, Baylor University, had studied geology, and he worked in the oil business in civilian life. So the interesting thing about that I mentioned that to you, he understood rocks. So when he comes ashore, he has a pretty decent feel for which rocks would be more dangerous in terms of mines or whatever else could be waiting for you and which might not be because of that understanding of geology. Isn't that weird? So Dawson was not new to combat. He was new to command. There was a difference. So he had served with the 16th Infantry in the Mediterranean in a staff capacity. Served very, very well, very honorably. But this was his first shot at being a company commander. And he wasn't sure if his men respected him. He took over, sort of like you, Barry, took over for a beloved leader, a guy, his very good friend, Ed Wazensky, who rotated to command of E Company, the unit that got decimated under WN62. And so basically, Wazensky was Spaulding's boss. He was his company commander. Wazensky survived, fortunately. But Dawson doesn't undercut Wazensky, nothing like that. He just sort of leads by example. He's determined on D-Day to lead from the front. As he says later, I think with tongue-in-cheek, I hope, he said, I didn't know whether I was going to get shot from the front or from the rear. So he's like, I'm going to lead these dudes the way I know how, right up front, and show that I have the courage, and I need to do that to live up to my family name. Okay? So when Dawson comes ashore, they basically trod that path that Streisig and his group, Spaulding Streisig, have trod 20, 30 minutes earlier, something like that. One of the things I found is that he and Dawson and Spaulding actually encounter each other, and they coordinate. With Dawson deciding to go, as you saw on the map, to the left towards Colville-sur-Mer, where G Company is going to be enmeshed in fighting throughout much of the day and night, and Spaulding in the other direction toward WN64. Again, knives in the vise, you know. So Dawson, in leading his company, personally destroys a machine gun nest by a grenade, just pitches the grenade up there to kill these guys, and they're like on an embankment above him. And so if that begins to earn him some level of respect, as you might imagine, then he's leading his guys into Colville. If you've ever been to Omaha Beach or the area, you've seen the Colville's church that you know you can definitely see from down on the beach. And so if you've got a church spire or steeple, what could that be? An observation point for artillery observers. And everybody knows that, and so they know they have to go in and they've got to take this thing. Now here is one of the really sad elements of this whole thing that occurs to me. Again, there's Joe Dawson. He and like I think 2 or 3 of his guys go into this church, and they basically fight it out. He calls it a little encounter. It's something very, very euphemistic. In fact, it's a deadly fight to the death, as close as I am to you. And inside a house of God, by people who thought of themselves as Christians on both sides, I dare say, certainly Dawson. And that is the tragedy and horrifying nature of war. So they do win that fight, but he loses the guy killed. When he leaves the church, he gets hit by a bullet. He gets hit in the leg, but he continues on in combat. And then there's a further tragedy. Even though G Company succeeds in its mission, it is holding parts of Colville-sur-Mer. It's keeping the Germans busy. It's outflanking WN62, all that great stuff. But here's the miscommunication. Earlier in the day, when you had things in a crisis point at Omaha Beach, like about 9:30 in the morning, 10 in the morning, 10:30, so on and so forth. The naval bombardment prior to the invasion obviously hadn't done much. But now, U.S. Navy and Royal Navy destroyers come in close. They begin to spot targets based on what they see and observe, not really by radio communication, and they start to shoot at them. USS Frankfurt, Emmons, Carmick, HMS Taliban, you name it. And they come in and they just start to pound a lot of these German guns that could have savaged the follow-on waves that are coming in. They do an incredible job. But there's still a lot of communication toward the end of the day with a lot of these salters. So a couple of the destroyers that are cruising around in the Easy Red sector have orders. If you do not get information that Colville-sur-Mer is in American hands by 1800 hours, 6 p.m., you will open fire on the Colville Church. So there they do that. G Company suffers more kill from our own Navy than they do for the Germans in the course of D-Day. It's incredibly tragic. Captain Dawson resented that the rest of his life, but it wasn't really anybody's fault. Again, easy for me to say, these weren't my men. I didn't know, So certainly this left a mark. Last guy I'll mention, Colonel George Taylor, higher rank. He's the commander of the 16th Infantry Regiment. That is the lead assault regiment for the Big Red One that day. He's a 45-year-old West Point grad. He is a very experienced amphibious combat commander from the Mediterranean. And he has a very positive effect on this battle. As I said, this is a junior leader's fight with a few exceptions. Brigadier General Dutch Coda on the 29th Division side, played by Robert Bitcham in the Longest Day, just as a reference point for you. And Brigadier General Willard Wyman comes ashore at 8:39 in the morning. He's the number 2 of the Big Red One. He has a very positive effect. But before him comes Taylor. Taylor lands about an hour and a half after HR. Well, this is one thing that's a little bit different in the culture of the Army then versus now. I would dare say now, the overall regimental commander would probably go in first and his executive officer later. It's reversed on D-Day. So Taylor's executive officer, Lieutenant Colonel John Huey Matthews, was killed right at HR as he was getting off his land craft. He is the highest ranking American killed on Omaha Beach. He's buried in the Normandy American Cemetery. He was a West Pointer. So Matthews is dead. You got all this chaos. You got these guys, hunkered down at the shingle bank. You've got the chaotic situation. And Taylor comes ashore and he's trying to salvage all this. And the biggest thing that's on his mind is that you've got to get people off the beach. So you've got this famous phrase associated with Omaha Beach and D-Day as a whole. Only 2 kinds of people are going to be on this beach, the dead and those about to die. Now get off the beach. Okay. Unfortunately, in The Longest Day, they ascribed that to Coda. Oh, I'm so sorry. Nobody likes to see movies with historians because we pick it all apart. That's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. No. But they knew that's why, because, it wasn't Coda who said that. It's Taylor. Okay. And in fact, one of the things I found out is that this wasn't spontaneous. Taylor was thinking this way months before D-Day. He wrote in a training memo, he said, in a landing operation, there are 2 classes of men that may be found at a beach. Those who are already dead and those who are about to die. So when he comes ashore, that's right on his mind. And he's going up and down, Easy Red and Fox Green, saying 2 kinds of people on this beach, the dead and those about to die. Get off the beach. He's totally motivating people to do something, okay? And so what's so interesting about it is that in the kind of fragmented memory effect that happens over decades, there's so many people who claim to have heard that or been part of it or near him. So that's one of the challenges I had. I was like, no. Only if I can verify that this guy had to have been there, was there, all this. So what you see in the book is exactly people who I thought could be verified as actually being there with Taylor, and we could prove this factually. And there was a lot of people. And he's totally in danger. And his staff is like, what are you doing? We're here with you, and we could get killed with you. Get down, you crazy old man. They're really worried. His regimental surgeon, Major Tetmeyer, was very courageous. He's like, Colonel Taylor, you're going to get killed. Stop, And yet he doesn't care. And so he has a 2-fold positive effect on the invasion at Omaha Beach. 1. He saves a lot of lives by motivating people to get off the beach where they're vulnerable and helpless. So I've often said, if you're an American soldier at Omaha Beach, on the beach, you're a target. On the move, you're a hunter. And that's typically what's happening here. He's turning people into hunters. Because what would you do? You're in shock. You don't know what to do. You're confused. You're maybe, disjointed from your chain of command. And so the natural inclination might be, seems sort of safe here. I'll just hunker down. I'm exhausted anyway. I don't know. I'll just do whatever. And now here goes this guy, and you see he's walking around, you're like, oh, I guess I have to get up and do something. He shames you into it, so that matters, too. All those knives in the vitals I'm talking about, we just talked about, Dawson, Spalding, Streisick, there's many others. If you don't reinforce them, they're going to be very vulnerable to the Germans, because they're kind of behind the German lines in a way, if you think of it that way, so they have to be reinforced. So when Taylor does this and motivates people to get up and get moving, it has a really tremendously signature effect on what happens there. And it's really bad news for the Germans, who are now overwhelmed as we had intended them to be. So the accomplishment of this whole thing, and I'm glossing over a lot. For that, you have to read the book, obviously. For that, you have to buy it. So, it's incredible. You should read it. But anyway, this is what the situation is by the end of the day. The Big Red One has established a kind of beachhead here. And there's a much larger story, of course, as I've alluded to. But it's not really a kind of continuous line. It's more like perimeters that you have that are some are connected and some are not. And you can kind of see where units are deployed to and fro. Some have been able to push inland pretty easily, others not. If you're an engineer, probably what you're doing is trying to clear mines, very dangerous in the dark, especially, as you might imagine. Start building the roads, all of that. They're very important stuff. And it's just the obstacles, you name it. So there's, by nightfall on that longest day, the Big Red One has control of this shaky beach. Most of the Germans who have survived are just wanting to get out of there. Okay, so their patrols bumping into one another in the course of the night, as they're colliding and no one knows who's where and all this kind of thing. Now, some Germans do get away, most do not. For most Germans, Omaha Beach against the Big Red One is a fatal experience or a captivity experience, one of the two. By my calculations, the division suffered 1,174 casualties, predominantly at the 16th Infantry, which was, of course, the lead assault regiment. That included 300 killed, but I think that's probably an underestimate. It's only what I could actually verify in a documentary source at the time. So it's probably more than that. Plus, remember all the units that are attached, the engineers, the tanks, all these other folks, that probably accounts for another 500. Nearly 100 of those Big Red One soldiers are buried at the Normandy American Cemetery today, overlooking the beach they once assaulted. So on that evening, Hubner finally comes ashore. And Hubner, of course, had been like a caged tiger in the course of the day, wanting to get ashore, but they're telling him, if you get ashore, you're going to be in the middle of this mess, and there'll be no command and communications. It'll make things exponentially worse for all of us. So you have to stay here. So he comes ashore about this time of night, and so he's kind of getting a sense of what has just happened. He gets briefed by staff officers that tell him an overview of what's happened, and it's really interesting because there's this sort of bond that is cemented that day between Hubner and the division. He will really be a successful commander. He'll be promoted to Corps Command eventually, but he pointed to that day as kind of a seminal moment in his life. He had such deep respect for what his soldiers had accomplished in Omaha Beach, and he was emotional about it. And when he's briefed, finally, the staff officer finishes, and all Hubner could say is, almost with tears in his eyes, he said, "You did. You did it." He didn't say we did it. I just think that's so interesting. He said, "You did it." And that was the respect right there. So I'll conclude on that note. If you have questions, love to answer. I know a lot of people want to hear about Eisenhower, Montgomery, Bradley. We could talk about that too. I'll bore you to death all night if you're willing to be here. So thank you. Appreciate it.
That's wonderful. When the tide came in, what time was that?
So, low tide is 6:30 in the morning, and I could be incorrect, but the tide was coming in very rapidly that day. So we're talking about probably a foot every 10 minutes or so. So what is that? Within about 2 hours or so, you're looking at high tide. So this is actually a bloody asset, because if we're looking at like this part of the map closer to the cliffside, one of the problems you've got there is a lot of the tide coming in. So you don't have any option but to go somewhere inland, because otherwise you're going to be swamped. you're going to be drowned under the tides. So that's really a problem at Fox Red, at Fox Green. Not as much as Easy Red, but still, as the tide comes in, now you don't see the obstacles as well and all those other perils you've got. Yeah.
I noticed in the last WWII when they were carrying bicycles.
Yeah. Yeah.
Staff on the psych.
That. How do you want to do this? Up going. Yeah. So the bicycle thing, that was more of a British thing that you see in the last rival, which I agree, Skipper. I highly recommend that movie to you. And it's really Luke too. So you would, as a bicycle unit, you're not necessarily the assault unit. You're probably going to come in what's called an LCI, landing craft infantry. Now those are landing craft that come in generally like an hour and a half, 2 hours after HR, when things are supposedly more secure, whether they are or not is debatable. But you'd have 2 ramps that come down on either side, and infantry just kind of coming down on either side, and in that case with their bicycles. That was accurate. The Americans don't have bicycles, but there are bicycles involved in the American Omaha Beach story. There's a German unit that comes into Col-de-sur-Mer later on D-Day, and they come in on bicycles. That's how they got into the battlefield.
Any questions?
Thank you. Very informative.
Appreciate it.
I recall some scholarship that came forth maybe 15 years ago. There's a discussion about how the planners had disgauged the recurrence. And this caused basically the attack heading. They continue to crap to try to make their points, but crap so much that they swamp, and there's a tremendous amount of the landing crap swamp because of that. But you better comment on that.
Yeah, so it's interesting because they knew a lot about the tides and then the tendencies. Nobody was not an exotic place. I mean, there's a lot known about it, of course, and the Allies had gathered a lot of information then, and of course, tangibly, they got a lot of information on the beach, the soil consistency, and all that in the months leading up to D-Day, mainly through miniature submarines. Incredibly courageous people who are operating off these various beaches. So they understood something about the tide, but not necessarily how heavy and easterly they were likely to be in the wake of a storm system such as have hit Normandy. And I tend to think that's maybe the difference maker. And maybe, too, I don't know, this is an amateurish kind of thing I'm saying, but that fleet that's offshore is going to have some sort of, pardon the pun, ripple effect. That maybe that's a factor in the tides. And all those landing craft has created a pretty choppy situation. So you're right. They don't anticipate the tides as they probably should have, because in that sense, they were probably being too optimistic. Good point.
But they were given some points to hit is to...
Yeah.
It's their coxes are trying, but
Oh, yeah.
for those points, they're actually crabbing their drips, so that they
Big time.
They get kind of a fort shits to the easy, But the tide in some area that cost, it's watching those boats just be.
Yeah. So if you didn't hear that, exact great point. The coxswains are trying to get to a fixed point and get ashore. That's what they've been briefed to do, trained to do, but it's so hard to do because it's very difficult to control those landing craft with those kinds of tides. And so there's a drift and there's a swamping effect, all of that kind of thing. And of course, pulled by the way the German opposition adds to it as well. And the intrinsic opposition of the obstacles and the mines, that restricts what you can do as a coxswain. Really frustrating day for the coxswains. Very, very difficult.
Did General Collins, did he advocate bringing the alligators like from the Pacific to come in for armored personnel carriers?
For armored personnel carriers. So the reference is to Major General J. Locke Collins, who's the 7th Corps commander, and it's basically the Utah Beach Assault commander. To my knowledge, he does not advocate using ducks. These are like these, if you've ever been to like Boston, the duck boats that take you around the harbor there, that's basically the same things what the Allies have in World War II. To my knowledge, he does not advocate putting armor aboard the ducks, but I could be wrong. I've never seen that.
I was talking about the Marines, the Trek vehicles they had at the Pacific.
The
With
LVTs.
Avers, the LVTs. Did they think about using those at Omaha?
They did, yes. So So that's the planing vehicle tracked, and so these are they're often called alligators, like you said, that they're like tracked vehicles that can negotiate their way over sandbars or coral reefs or whatever. And of course, they're going to be used quite a bit in the Pacific by both the Army and the Marines. And there are, I think that there are several dozen of them available in England to be used, but there's also some difficulties logistically. I don't claim to be an expert on that, and I know someone who is, a guy named Steve Zaloga, who has done every kind of research you could possibly imagine about the LVTs, and kind of concludes that the upshot of his work, as I understand it, is that he's saying, oh, they weren't just being small-minded and saying, oh, we have nothing to learn from you, we're not going to use those. There were some serious kind of logistical and procedural problems as to why it was difficult to embed them. But yeah, they probably would have helped though. Those are effective landing craft.
So we all love to pick at movies, right?
Yeah, especially me.
It's like it. So of the various movies you mentioned, whether it's The Longest Day, The Big Red One, any of them, I'm more interested in The Big Red One. What are some of the things that they actually did get right? We can pick up all the problems, but what are some of the surprising things that, oh, I can't believe they actually figured that out? Really get that.
What?
Lee Morgan, that opened this big hole and he ties it to.
Yep. Yeah. So let's talk about the Big Red One first. Yeah, I mean, you just said Lee Marvin's character in that movie does talk about, an infantryman getting into a hole and allowing the tanks to roll over them rather than running away where you'll be more vulnerable. Certainly have that. You definitely have the dynamic down in terms of the cynicism and the weariness. There's absolutely no question about that. It's also, I think the Big Red one thing that's that it explores pretty well is that sometimes the schism between veterans and replacements, I think it goes too far too, because it creates this idea that the whole war is fought by 4 or 5 survivors, and I mean, no way. The attrition in rifle companies, especially the Big Red One, from the beginning or to the end, is something in the order of 400 to 600%. So sorry, that's just not happening. The replacements were important, and today's rookie is tomorrow's veteran in that kind of situation. But I think that movie really captures the spirit of the unit and its kind of parochialism too. And what I think is a bummer about that movie is that the Omaha Beach thing is just such a miss. It was probably a budget thing. It's so cheesy. It's so poorly done in the Bangalore relay team and that. So there's you've never seen it. It's like Bangalore torpedo really existed, and it did play a part in Omaha Beach in blowing a hole in the barbed wire in the mines. And so Strisek uses it, by the way, to clear that pathway. But they create the situation in the movie where everybody has their place on the relay team, and you don't want to be 1, you want to be number 16, like the last guy, And one guy is willing to sell his GI life insurance for a safer billet, all this kind of thing. To my knowledge, that didn't exist. Private Ryan, what did they get right? I mean, like I mentioned earlier, having Captain Miller say every inch of this beach is pre-sighted. That is so 100% true. The seasickness, the confusion, the desperation, the portrayal of the Shingle Bank, and then of course that's on the 29th Division side, you end up with a seawall versus the Shingle Bank. But the frustration of the medics, I really like that. The triaging, there's 100 things, of course. There's some things they got wrong that I point this out all the time. I don't understand this. The log obstacles are pointing in the wrong direction. I don't know why. It was such an incredible movie, but why is it wrong? But it's one of those imponderables for someone like me.
Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I'd like to say a couple of things real quick. We have Johnny Williams with us here tonight. He's the linchpin of the River Valley Memorial in Harris. He'd be glad to tour you through there anytime. If you haven't been, we'd love for you to come. And John Butler, raise your hand. His father was a member of the Big Red One. Not there to World War II and sloppy thereafter.
All right. And also, if anyone is interested in purchasing a book and having John sign it, They'll be right back here. You just pick it up here, have him sign it, and pay for it at the front desk. We'll lift this up for everybody. And if you haven't had a chance to look around and you'd like to do that, you'll have a little bit of time to do that. Thank you all very much. We appreciate everybody coming.
This video has been brought to you by Juice. Juice is your community-owned provider for electric, internet, cable TV, and true local programming.